Good morning, everybody. My name is Patrick McQueen. For those of you who don't know me, I get the opportunity to do a number of these informational seminars or informational webinars with WeServe. So I'm very appreciative of that opportunity to do that kind of stuff. But in addition to providing these, I am a practicing real estate attorney. I've been doing this for about 16 years. Our firm handles all real estate matters. We don't handle anything else. And on the real estate side, we handle transactional matters and we also handle litigation. So just a little bit by way of background. Whenever I give one of these brief discussions, and this one will be pretty brief and to the point, I always like to give some legal updates and kind of tell everybody what we're seeing from a legal standpoint. And the interesting part of this one is I probably did another one of these calls or webinars about 30 days ago. And we're kind of at the point where nothing's changed. So that's kind of cool. I was looking at, sort of the trends and I'm like, wow, these things are actually the same as last time or very similar to last time. The legal updates that I have, though, are basically two or threefold. The first thing is that the commercial world is still not doing great, particularly as it pertains to restaurants, as it pertains to gyms, as it pertains to spas. In Arizona, we're actually pretty lucky because we can eat outside even when it's hot. But in other states, we're seeing some restaurants who are going to be in quite a bit of trouble once the colder weather comes around. We've also seen the office landscape change a bit, and we're doing a bunch of amendments and lease renegotiations for tenants and landlords. But on the office side, it's been quite interesting. We've seen some spaces be very, very much minimized because people who work otherwise in offices are not going into their offices. They're working from home. And so the tenants want to renegotiate those office leases. And then contrast that completely with some folks who are coming in and negotiating for more space. And that's because they want their employees to be socially distanced from one another. And so it's just a bizarre time for sure. But again, on the sort of overall commercial front, the negative news is still there. It's the restaurants, the gyms, the spas that are doing poorly, and then the offices, the office space stuff. When we're negotiating, we're starting to see some offices that are failing or need the amendments that they didn't probably need maybe back in April or May, but now they're seeking these lease amendments. So that's kind of what we're seeing on the commercial side. On the residential side, we're seeing a ton of evictions. So if you represent any investors, now's the time to get in line and get in the queue on the residential eviction side. There are very few limitations or prohibitions on the ability to evict right now. Now, there's still a couple of things. The CARES Act, which was the federal legislation that came out in March. Basically, you still have to give a 30-day notice before you want to evict under the CARES Act. Governor Ducey's Act is still around to some extent. You have to make certain proofs. And Governor Ducey's Act, the executive orders that he provided weren't really moratoriums. They basically were a pause on certain writs of restitution or the enforcement of writs of restitution, on the enforcement of eviction orders. And so a lot of people thought that was a moratorium, but it really wasn't a moratorium. And now we have CDC. The CDC came out with something that basically says, hey, we have the authority to stop evictions, and we're stopping them for a certain subset of the population who can make certain proofs. So the residential side, we're seeing a ton of evictions. If you need any further information on that, we've got kind of a flow chart as to all of those sort of competing moratoriums and how you might fit into that, or how a tenant or a landlord might fit into that. So feel free to shoot me an email after this webinar if you need that outline. And then the other thing we're seeing, so the third thing we're kind of seeing are people who are scrambling a little bit to comply with the new limited liability company laws that came out. Well, there were two parts of the new limited liability company laws. So if you have a client or you have your own LLC for real estate or other sorts of investments, well, the LLC laws changed September 1st of this year. And there was a bunch of changes that went into effect. And now there are new obligations that you may have to other members. There are new accounting rules. There are new authority documents. And so what we're seeing are title companies sometimes or now are putting pauses on deals, a lot of commercial deals. So let's say you want to sell a property and you've incorrectly or you haven't addressed the new LLC rules and statutes with in terms of your LLC. At the title companies are saying, hold on, now you have to go back, amend your LLC documents before we'll allow this sale to go through. So it's kind of creating a little bit of a mess. So the big stuff, again, commercial world, seeing a lot of negativity there. Residential side, doing a lot of evictions there. And then the LLC, the transactional stuff, we're seeing a lot of people scrambling. You got to get these new LLC, you got to comply with these new LLC rules so that you're not stuck scrambling. But on a much more positive note, a much more pleasant note, are the things that we're going to talk about today. And I don't have a whole lot, but I do think this is kind of the bright side, of the cheery side of what's going on in the commercial world. And that largely deals with warehouse space and industrial leasing. Okay. So from our clients are telling us, hey, we want a more robust e-commerce presence or platform, and we want to get away a little bit from the brick and mortar. So we want, a warehouse or industrial. We need some space for refrigeration. We need some space to store goods so that we can get them to our customers quicker. So we want a warehouse, or we want some light industrial. We want to manufacture the parts. We want to manufacture the goods. We want to manufacture the products so that we don't have to rely on other countries to provide us to supply us with what we're relying on. Okay, so we need a warehouse, or we need a small industrial building. We want to control our own supply chain, right? My favorite, though, for the reasons that people are going to the warehouse and industrial as sort of the sweet spot in the commercial world, are these ghost restaurants. And if you haven't heard about what a ghost restaurant is, very interesting concept, where basically you have this whole assembly line of vegetables and all sorts of cooking supplies, and it's different restaurants there who are creating their products, and then the delivery guys come pick them up and take it away. And so they're using warehouse spaces and industrial spaces for that. And we've got a couple going on right now in parts of Phoenix, and I think that's a fantastic and interesting concept to sort of guard against what's happening in the restaurant industry. So the warehouse and industrial stuff is really taking off. I want to go over a couple of key provisions that you want to think about if you're helping a client get into a warehouse lease, get into an industrial lease. Okay, so the first thing is the term, right? The duration of the lease. Industrial and warehouse leases are usually much longer than a traditional office lease, even longer than a restaurant lease, even longer than retail. So you're looking at a term of about 10 years in most situations. Then you have 2 or 3 10-year options, because these folks want to stick around and have this presence. Second thing, in an industrial lease or in a warehouse lease, these are net leases, right? So the tenant, it's either a single net, double net, or triple net. So the tenant, the manufacturer, is the one taking care of these expense items. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Parking is usually a very important component for retail. It's very important component for office, very important for restaurant use, not so much in warehouse and industrial. But what is important, because we have less employees usually in a warehouse and in an industrial situation, but what is important is the logistics of the parking. So that's one of the due diligence items that we'll discuss, or you might want to consider in getting your leases taken care of. The fourth thing that you're going to want to have, and by the way, guys, you don't need to write this down if you were thinking about writing it down. I have checklists for you. I have due diligence checklists. I have a memo on all of this stuff. So if you need any of this information, I'll make sure I can get it to you. So we talked about the term. We talked about the fact that these are net leases. We talked about parking. Parking in and of itself isn't necessarily a huge deal, but it's the logistics so that, trucks can get in and pull in and deliver and all that good stuff, pick up. Expansion rights is another big one. So in these leases, most tenants need expansion rights. I've been negotiating leases of all types for 16 years now. And I would say that I probably do 8 to 10 industrial or warehouse leases in a year. Okay. I would say that about 75% of those people who are tenants usually come back and exercise the right to more space. And so expansion rights are very, very key to building in to those leases. So you want to make sure that you're including expansion rights into your leases. Okay. So again, the terms different than a traditional lease. Parking different than a traditional lease. the net versus a gross lease, definitely different. Expansion rights, very important. The time frame is also, you got to keep this in mind. The time frame from LOI to tenant signing the lease to actual rent commencement, usually much longer. We're talking 6 to 9 months. And so these folks really need to plan ahead, and there's a lot of due diligence needed. And again, if you need a due diligence checklist to make sure that these folks are getting into the right spot, just let me know. And then finally, as with any lease, you're going to want to have a solid use provision. So the use provision needs to describe, and needs to be broad enough so that these folks can change and morph with consumer or customer demands. Okay, so if you're producing widgets in an industrial space, and you need to produce some other sort of widget, you need that flexibility. And so anytime you can build in some flexibility into the use provision of your commercial lease, that's going to be huge, and it's particularly big for warehouse and industrial. Now, a couple of due diligence items that I want to address, and these due diligence items are going to be helpful for your clients, whether they're leasing or they're buying. Okay, and there's about 4 or 5 or so that we consistently see people or tenants or buyers goofing up on. Okay, first is ceiling heights. All right, for whatever reason, people are super excited to get into their warehouse or their industrial space, and they don't actually go in and measure the ceiling heights, and they don't make sure that their pallets and their boxes and everything fits. And then they want to, and then you want to make sure that you can get a forklift in there if you need to. You want to make sure that you can maneuver the forklift. You want to make sure that they're not bumping into the sprinkler heads, bumping into other racks. And so ceiling heights, for whatever reason, gets goofed up quite a bit. So you want to make sure, or your clients are going to want to make sure that they have appropriate ceiling heights. Okay, so ceiling heights is one that we see goofed up quite a bit. As to racks, I mentioned racks. Lots of buyers and lots of tenants insist that when they're buying an industrial space or warehouse space, that racks come with it. So they want the existing ones. They want to make sure they go in, they see these racks, and they say, hey, these are perfect. Well, a lot of times the racks are completely wrong. So when they get in there, they realize that the product won't fit in these racks, the racks aren't deep enough, whatever it may be. And so usually what we see are the racks are off, the racking is off, and people end up having to take out the existing racks and put in their own and buy their own and spend the money on their own. And so you want to make sure that they've done this analysis prior to getting in there, prior to signing the lease, as to whether they really even need the existing racking and are willing to pay for it, or hey, let's just put it in our own when we get in there. Okay, so ceiling heights, racks are incredibly important, and we see those goofed up. The other one is code compliance. This is probably the most expensive mistake that people are making. We're talking about fire suppression, safety, and other code compliance. Buyers seem to fail to check into the safety related items for whatever reason. They're not verifying that there's going to be enough electrical power to supply their freezers with enough energy to keep their stuff cold, as part of their due diligence, and or whatever it may be. They need to have power outlets for certain manufacturing activities, and they end up not tripping the lines and not having enough electricity for their operations, or they get paid a visit by the fire department or code compliance or some sort of other inspector, and then they have to retrofit or redo everything, the electrical, the suppression, the fire sprinklers, etc. And so this ends up being quite an expensive issue. We have a client right now who's being forced to spend $300,000 that they didn't expect to spend. They bought a warehouse, and then they came to us after they received a letter from the city of Phoenix saying, hey, this stuff is bad. Your fire safety and your suppression stuff is bad. You need to rewire everything. And that's going to be about $300,000. So that's a pretty important issue. Docking is another one. The door docks, and that's what I'm talking about. Those alone, if they're not the right size, it's probably a $25,000 refitting. So you want to make sure that sizing is okay in these particular situations. So we've got ceiling heights, racks, code compliance, the docking issue, and then timeframes as well. So in a lease, you're looking at 6 months before this thing, before they're operational in many situations. So you can get in a little quicker. Sometimes it takes a little longer, but I would say an average is about 6 months from LOI to rent commencement. On the buy side, I've seen these things take up to 12 months for somebody to get in. So it's good to start in this area early. It's also good to have a really solid due diligence checklist so that none of this stuff gets missed on the back end. Okay. So if you need a due diligence checklist, if you need any of the information that we just went over, I went over the key items. There's obviously a lot more, but I went over the key things that you ought to think about considering when you're helping somebody lease or when you're helping somebody buy. And we talked about some of the due diligence items. So if you need any of the stuff we talked about, give me a shout, shoot me an email. I'm happy to get it over to you. I'm going to now open it up to see if anybody has any questions. So I'll stop the share and see if there's anything in the chat. Feel free to take yourselves off of mute as well if you have a question. Let's see. Okay, so somebody asked, Patrick, can you please send the checklist you mentioned to the attendees? So I don't actually get your guys's, so Lisa commented, there's my email address from Lisa. So go ahead and shoot me an email if you're interested in any of those checklists, because I don't get your contact information. I don't retain that. So if you want to reach out to me though, that's totally fine. But it looks like Lisa's got that taken care of in the chat box.
Yeah. Patrick, if you'll send that to me, I'll get it to everybody.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll get you these little memos. I'll get you sort of a form checklist, and hopefully it's helpful to you guys.
Perfect. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions?
One quick question.
Sure.
The only thing you didn't mention in the due diligence is turn radius for delivery vehicles, because I've run into problems with that every once in a while. Is that part of your checklist?
It is part of the checklist, and that's a huge issue. And I tried to mention that a little bit when I said parking's not usually a big deal, but the logistics of having somebody come in and out. So that's kind of what I was getting at. The turn radius, that's a huge one for sure. But that is part of the due diligence analysis that either tenants or buyers absolutely need to consider. That's huge. Thanks, Rick.
You bet. Thank you, by the way, for being here.
Yeah, you bet. So it looks like if we're beginning to start on more commercial, where can we get more classes specifically selling commercial? Lisa, I don't know how to answer that one. I think that if you're interested, I'm happy to get whatever information, due diligence checklist, form documents, whatever you need. You're welcome to get that from me if you wanted to. And I try to do some stuff from the legal side, fairly regularly with the folks that we serve in Lisa. And so, and I think there's some on videotape too. Videotape makes me sound old. I think they're recorded in some fashion, but right, Lisa? Yeah. So she's putting her thumbs up. So
that's true. Yes, they are recorded.
Yeah. And I do classes for WeServe. I do classes for other folks. Do webinars. I mean, I think that's where I begin is just making sure that you're getting educated, digging into the documents, and then you can and asking the right questions.
Quick comment.
Sure.
CCIM, it's all about education. So I throw that out there because I am a CCIM and a huge advocate for the organization. As a matter of fact, I'm hoping that we host one of the core classes at the WeServe Chandler building next year.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think the education component is the biggest benefit there for sure.
That's awesome. I was actually looking into CCIM. I didn't know if it looked like they have memberships and all that stuff. So that's a confirmation. That's where I need to look.
and good luck too, for sure.
Thank you.
You got it. Well, if I don't have any other questions, we'll sign off for now, and feel free to shoot me an email if you need any forms or documents, and I look forward to seeing you guys later. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
My pleasure.